For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. Yosemite is both a cathedral and a crucible. The kind that makes a man stand quiet and feel small, the kind that crushes you and lifts you at the same time. The cliffs rise like the walls of a fortress, cut clean by time and wind and water. They do not care if you marvel at them. You think for a moment that you could stay forever, that the world makes sense here, but the same beauty that draws people in has killed many. One wrong step, and you are gone. No second chances, no mercy. People test themselves against the wild because they must, because there is something in the human heart that wants to stand in a place like this and know what it is like to be alive. The danger in Yosemite is not the kind that shouts. It does not warn you. It does not make a sound. It is quiet, patient, waiting. It hides in the way the light makes the cliffs look soft when they are hard, sharp, and slick. The beauty of this place is a liar. It makes you think you belong here, that you understand it, that you are in control. Yosemite does not care for men, but men care for Yosemite, and that is enough. Let's venture back to Yosemite National Park, where survival is earned, not given. This is outdoor disasters. For Dean Potter, his base jump would be a disaster. Dean Potter, an American adventurer, was a remarkable figure in the world of extreme sports. He excelled in free climbing, alpinism, base jumping, and highlining, achieving numerous difficult first ascents, free solo ascents, speed ascents, and enchainments in Yosemite National Park in Patagonia. Standing at an impressive 6'5" and weighing 180 pounds, he was larger than life. Potter was not content with conventional thrills. He pushed the boundaries by inventing freebase, a hair-raising act that involved free soloing with a parachute. He also pioneered untethered highlining and mastered base jumping. His life was a true adventure, and he made a significant impact on the world of extreme sports. Born in 1972 and raised in New Hampshire, Dean Potter discovered his passion for climbing during his years in southern New Hampshire. His first foray into climbing happened on the granite cliffs of Joe English Hill, a towering one. 273-foot mountain near a local military base. Breaking the rules, he embarked on a solo climb, wearing nothing but his Converse All-Stars. This bold act marked the beginning of his adventurous climbing journey and showcased his fearless approach to the sport. While attending the University of New Hampshire, Potter's passion for climbing grew, but he couldn't resist his calling. Leaving university at the age of 20, he fully committed himself to climbing, leading him to become a highly influential figure in the free-spirited and countercultural roots of rock climbing during the 21st century. During the 90s, Potter embarked on a nomadic journey, living a rough and minimalist lifestyle, even by dirtbag standards. He relied on food stamps, salt sandwiches, and condiments to survive, while spending years in his van or couch surfing. Moving between the boulders of Hueco tanks and the red cracks of Moab, he left behind a trail of challenging first ascents and worked temporary dead-end jobs. Potter's climbing legacy spans the landscapes of the United States, South America, and Europe, but it was in Yosemite Valley where his climbing career truly flourished. In 1993, he arrived in Yosemite and crossed paths with the legendary slacklining pioneer, Chongo Chuck. From Chuck, Potter learned about the gritty dirtbag lifestyle and was introduced to slacklining, which became an essential part of his climbing skills. Over the following decades, Potter became a prominent figure in Yosemite's climbing community, especially during the late 90s and early 2000s. His audacious ascents, solo climbs, and record-breaking achievements made him stand out among fellow climbers. His fearless approach and innovative techniques left a lasting impact on the sport, particularly within the iconic cliffs and crags of Yosemite Valley. Inspired by Yosemite legends, Potter set his sights on speed records and big wall link-ups. In 1986, Peter Croft and Jim Bridwell set the bar with their 24-hour link-up of Half Dome and El Capitan, showcasing the possibilities of the number of pitches a climber could attempt in a single day. The concept of the Triple Crown, a one-day link-up of Half Dome, El Capitan, and Mount Watkins, remained unrealized until Dean Potter and Timmy O'Neill took on the challenge. Their grueling journey involved 71 pitches, most climbed free except for some tougher sections. They successfully completed the first Triple Crown link-up after scaling 7,000 feet or 2,100 meters and miles of hiking on approach trails. In 2001, Dean Potter entered the fiercely competitive arena for the nose speed record, a prestigious title in the world of rock climbing. Alongside Timmy O'Neill, he attempted the nose on El Capitan, completing the route in an impressive 3 hours and 59 minutes, breaking the previous record set by Hans Florine and Peter Croft, which had stood at 4 hours and 31 minutes. Another significant achievement was Potter's second ascent of the notoriously challenging route on Half Dome, known as Southern Belle. It had not been successfully repeated since its first free ascent in 1988 by Dave Schultz and Scott Cosgrove, a span of over 18 years. With its sparse protection, Southern Belle remains one of the most dangerous climbs in Yosemite, and Potter acknowledged the high risk involved. "On a fair bit of the upper ground, if you fall, you might as well be dead," he said. Potter's most awe-inspiring and controversial climbs were his free solo endeavors throughout his career. He achieved numerous impressive free solo first ascents and introduced the concept of freebase, solo climbing with a parachute as a last resort safety measure. One such iconic ascent was Separate Reality, a route he soloed 5 times consecutively, leaving a profound mark on climbing history. In addition to that, he tackled the challenging route A Dog's Roof, one of the hardest free solos attempted in Yosemite, just days after his Separate Reality feat. Potter's achievements continue to be celebrated in the climbing community, leaving an unforgettable legacy in the world of extreme sports. When reflecting on his significant climbing achievements, Potter often mentioned his experiences in Argentina in 2002. It was a memorable season in Patagonia, where daring solo ascents were at their peak. In the Fitzroy Massif, Potter completed the first solo ascent of Super Canaleta, a demanding 1,600-foot or 490-meter route. Embracing a light-is-right approach, he took on this challenging climb with minimal gear, a quart of water, and no warm clothing. Setting off before dawn, he navigated the treacherous ice and granite, reaching the summit in an impressive 6.5 hours. Not long after, Potter climbed Cerro Torre via the compressor route in just 8.5 hours, facing an unexpected storm that left him seeking shelter in an ice cave with only a tin-foil survival blanket for warmth. Only a little over a week later, Potter returned to the Fitzroy Massif for a record-breaking first ascent on a route he would later name Californian Roulette. This 7,100-foot or 2,100-meter route on Fitzroy's southwest side had claimed the lives of several climbers attempting it before. After a grueling 10-hour climb to the summit, tragedy struck as a falling toaster-sized boulder hit Potter's leg, causing him to black out. Despite severe injuries and perilous conditions, he embarked on a critical 36-hour descent, a survival situation of the highest risk in his climbing career. This experience motivated Potter to explore base jumping as a safer and more efficient way to descend from mountains, leading to a new chapter in his adventurous journey. One of the most contentious moments in Dean Potter's climbing career occurred during his free solo ascent of the Delicate Arch in Arches National Park, Utah. This climb triggered widespread controversy within the climbing community, leading to heated debates and criticism from friends and mentors. It even resulted in Potter losing sponsorship from 2 major companies, Patagonia and Black Diamond. Potter had been eyeing the 60-foot or 20-meter arch for over 12 years, and on May 6, 2006, he began working on it. He meticulously studied every feature and detail on the arch, but a fixed line had to be set up before attempting the free solo. This would allow him to practice and be recorded from above. The method used to set up the fixed line remains a mystery, as neither Potter nor Brad Lynch, his partner, revealed it. Potter is believed to have climbed the arch a total of 6 times. Despite claiming to adhere to a strict leave-no-trace approach, some critics alleged that up to 5 rope grooves were left behind. In response, Potter defended himself, stating that the marks were not his. Others had been on the arch. Though climbing the arch wasn't technically illegal at the time, the backlash from Potter's ascent led to climbing bans throughout the park. These bans prevented new routes from being established in Arches National Park, significantly changing its climbing regulations. In 2008, Potter's solo ascent of the 1,000-foot or 300-meter deep blue sea on the north face of the Eiger was not only one of the most impressive achievements of his career, but also the testing ground for his innovative creation, freebase. The slightly overhanging limestone face of the Eiger provided the perfect environment for Potter to refine this new discipline, which allowed for the freedom of soloing with a safety parachute, minimizing the risk of instantaneous death. Spending the climbing season in Switzerland, Potter honed his base jumping skills and pushed his limits on the challenging limestone routes. Reflecting on the experience, he acknowledged, "Freebase climbing the deep blue sea has stirred my way of thinking more than anything in the past." After his groundbreaking ascent on the Eiger, Dean Potter returned to Yosemite Valley, bringing the honed freebase skills he acquired in Switzerland. He applied this innovative approach to the iconic walls of Yosemite, resulting in remarkable ascents. Among his most notable achievements was his solo climb of the rostrum, a towering 1,400-meter pillar, first free soloed by Peter Croft in 1985. Potter took the challenge to a new level by repeating the rostrum ascent and soloing the alien roof finish, an even more challenging feat, considered the hardest long solo attempted in the valley. Before Alex Honnold's groundbreaking free solo of Freerider, Dean Potter made significant progress in soloing El Capitan. Although not a complete free solo, Potter's partial ascent was a major milestone in El Capitan's free soloing history. He started from the top of El Capitan, down-climbed the slabby upper pitches of Lurking Fear, traversed the Thanksgiving Ledge, and finished the last 6 pitches of Freerider. Potter named this route Easy Rider, allowing him to bypass the technically challenging slab section at the start of Freerider. While not the first true free solo of El Capitan, his ascent undoubtedly contributed to the progression of free soloing on this iconic wall. Apart from his climbing achievements, Dean Potter was a pioneering figure in the world of slacklining. He attributed much of his climbing success to the skills developed through slacklining, which improved his balance, focus, and body awareness, qualities essential for navigating difficult climbing routes. Recognizing its benefits, the climbing community quickly embraced slacklining as a valuable training tool. In 2003, Potter achieved another milestone when he became the second person to highline the Lost Arrow Spire untethered, completing both the uphill and downhill versions. This extraordinary feat showcased his exceptional balance and fearlessness, considering the Lost Arrow Spire's daunting 2,700-foot or 800-meter vertical rock formation in Yosemite National Park. Another memorable moment in Potter's slacklining career was the famous moonwalk at Cathedral Peak. The image of Potter, silhouetted against the moonlit sky as he traversed the highline, has reached a near-legendary status, cementing his status as a trailblazer in the world of slacklining. Upon discovering base jumping at the age of 30, Dean Potter, true to his adventurous nature, immediately began pushing the boundaries of the sport. Within a year of starting his base jumping career, he encountered a life-threatening incident at the Cave of Swallows near Mexico City. His parachute malfunctioned during a 1,200-foot or 365-meter jump, leaving him hurtling toward the ground with no protection. In a split-second decision, just 200 feet from the cave floor, Potter managed to grab a 10-millimeter rope used by other jumpers to climb out. Clutching the rope tightly, he crash-landed in the cave, miraculously surviving the fall, but sustaining severe hand injuries with deep rope burns in both palms. Despite this harrowing experience, Potter continued to push the limits of base jumping, becoming one of the leading base jumpers in the Americas. He also became a vocal advocate for legalizing base jumping in national parks. In 2011, Potter set a new record for the longest wingsuit flights ever recorded by flying 4.6 miles or 7.5 kilometers off the north face of Eiger. However, disaster struck on May 16, 2015, in Yosemite Valley. Standing with his partner Graham Hunt, his girlfriend Jen Rapp, and their dog Whisper at the edge of Taft Point, they looked down 3,000 feet or 900 meters above the famous Green Valley with the sunset on the horizon. Knowing that base jumping was illegal in national parks, especially in Yosemite, where the majestic cliffs make it a prime location, Potter and Hunt still jumped numerous times. They were familiar with the route, and despite the risks, they decided to take the leap. Taft Point is usually off-limits, marked with railings to protect tourists, but the thrill-seeking pair preferred jumping from a spot about 100 yards west. They would descend hundreds of feet with arms and legs spread, their wingsuits filling with air until falling turned into soaring through the air. They would fly right toward the heart of the valley. There is a sloping rib of a ridge there, a relatively unremarkable feature called Lost Brother. It is not marked on the park maps handed to visitors. It juts downward into the valley before abruptly ending into a vertical wall known mostly to climbers. In that ridge is a notch shaped like a V. Potter and Hunt had made the jump many times, sometimes together, sometimes not. Hunt had done it without Potter several days before. He would usually steer himself through the notch. Potter had been through the notch several times, but usually went around the ridge to the left. It depended on how well they maintained altitude once they began to fly. The men were zipped into their suits. They did not wait for the full cloak of dusk. A breeze from behind caught their attention, but did not send a strong enough warning to pause. It was 7:25 p.m. on May 16th. Potter jumped, and Hunt soon after. Jen Rapp clicked photographs. The men fell out of the frame before her lens caught them falling away, soaring with wings spread. Hunt quickly passed Potter. His suit was made for speed. Potter had set records for long flights and preferred loft. He had been in Canada working on a design to allow him to land on his belly on glacial ice with no parachute necessary. He's low, Jen thought to herself. Why is he going toward the notch? She saw Hunt veer left as if to go around the ridge, then quickly back to the right. Potter held his line for the notch. They disappeared into the hole that led to the dusky valley. Rapp heard a thwap. Her mind tried to tell her it was the familiar sound of a parachute deploying. It was followed almost immediately by a duller, heavier sound. Rapp waited alone on the cliff's edge for more clues from below. None came. She clicked through her camera to retrace the flight paths in the photos. In 2 dimensions, without depth perception, it was hard to tell what happened to the shrinking specks in the frames. There was Hunt, who disappeared into the grayness of the rocks. There was Potter, who made it through the leading edge of the notch, a downward half-pipe, and fell out of sight. Somewhere far below was Rebecca Haney, Hunt's girlfriend of a few months. She had been hiking when Hunt called, saying that he and Potter planned to jump at Taft Point, meet at the meadow at 7:30. She aborted her hike and went to the lodge area in Yosemite Valley to get a drink and pass the time. She did not see a text message that Hunt sent at 6:55 until about 7:25 because of spotty cellular service in Yosemite. He had asked her to turn on her 2-way radio to communicate. She quickly texted back that she would in a few minutes. She drove around the darkening forested roads for 90 minutes, waiting to hear from Hunt again. I was putting my faith in a lot of irrational places, she said in a phone interview, even though I knew what probably happened. In the dwindling light, Rapp rushed back up the trail to the parking lot. She drove her car the 13 miles or 20 kilometers back to Wawona Road, made a right, and headed down to the valley floor. She went to El Capitan Meadow, but there was no one there. Her phone had no text messages. Unsure of what to do or where to go, she drove to the rented house she and Potter shared in Yosemite West, a cluster of homes back up Wawona Road, past the Glacier Point turnoff. The couple recently bought 31 acres nearby and had plans to build their own home. That rainy and cool day had been spent clearing trees and brush, and Hunt was there to help until the clearing skies led to the idea of making an evening jump off Taft Point. Upon arriving at the dark and empty house, Jen's mind raced as she studied the photos and considered various scenarios. She wondered if the sounds she heard were Hunt crashing or if Potter had witnessed the accident and was searching for his friend. Perhaps Potter was hurt, or maybe they were hiding from park rangers or had been arrested. Her thoughts were a mix of hope and worry, and she kept anticipating their return. Around 9:30, a car pulled up, and Haney stepped out alone. The 2 women drove back into the valley, looking for familiar faces among climbers camping or hanging around the village and the bar, but found none. At about 10:30, they sought help from Mike Gauthier, Yosemite's chief of staff, who quickly called the Yosemite dispatcher to report the missing base jumpers. A late-night search was initiated by rangers and volunteers from Yosemite Search and Rescue. As daybreak arrived, there were still no answers, and Jen felt helpless waiting. At 4 a.m., she decided to take binoculars and head to the base of the canyon below Lost Brother, hoping to spot any movement or color. She screamed into the darkness but received no response. As the helicopter took off in the morning, 2 bodies were quickly spotted. It was evident that neither man had deployed a parachute. Hunt had crashed into the right wall after clearing the base of the notch, while Potter was found several hundred feet farther into the notch. Speculation arose that the site of Hunt's accident or the air disturbance from his maneuvers might have affected Potter's concentration or control. Contrary to some news reports, neither man wore a GoPro video recorder, but Potter had jumped with a smartphone strapped to his head. Although the phone was heavily damaged, Park Service investigators hoped to find clues from it, along with Rapp's photos. The search for answers and understanding of the tragic event continued. Rapp returned to Taft Point 3 days after the accident. By then, there was a memorial at the cliff's edge, where Potter and Hunt had made their final jump. El Capitan sits across the valley a little to the left. Yosemite Falls can be seen a little to the right over the top of the brown, downsloping ridge with the notch. The memorial included feathers, a beer can, Tibetan prayer flags, and a photograph of Potter. There is little doubt that Potter's spirit will be felt in Yosemite and far beyond, thanks to the legendary legacy he carved out in his most extraordinary, original way. Potter lived on the outer edge of extreme sports and perished in his beloved Yosemite National Park. The beauty of Yosemite inspired him to be the best possible artist, partner, father, and friend, Rapp said. This is exactly where he'd want his rule-breaking, fringe-pushing, counterculture spirit to live forever. Dean Potter was a visionary in the climbing world, continually pushing the limits of human capability in free solo climbing, highlining, and base jumping. He explored new routes and techniques, inspiring others to think creatively and pursue their own boundaries. Potter's death was a stark reminder of the risks inherent in extreme sports, particularly base jumping. His passing prompted discussions about safety, risk management, and the importance of responsible decision-making in high-risk activities. During the memorial service, Jen Rapp sat alone on a rock. A raven appeared. Unflinchingly, it approached and patiently ate a piece of salami out of her hand. It had never happened to her before. The way the raven looked at me so intently, Rapp said, pausing as the thought drifted unfinished. Yeah, it was Dean. In an Instagram post 3 weeks before his death, Potter pondered how he had managed to survive all these years. He said he wanted to be free like a raven. Somehow, I've made a life of dipping my toes in icy water, feeling the lift of fresh, clean air and the pull of planets overhead, he wrote. Sure, I lack a lot, but it's equally for sure that I fly free. For one group of hikers, their Yosemite excursion would be one of the worst disasters in the park's history. Half Dome is a Yosemite icon and a great challenge to many hikers. Thousands of people reach the summit each year. For most, it is an exciting, arduous hike. For a few, it becomes more of an adventure than they wanted. Indeed, park rangers assist hundreds of people on the Half Dome Trail every summer. Much of the hike to Half Dome is an adventure into wilderness, and while there is nothing you can do to guarantee your safety, but that was the thrill co-workers and close friends Tom Rice and Adrian Esteban lived for. Regular outdoor companions, Tom Rice and Adrian Esteban headed a party that would attempt the 16-mile round-trip hike to summit Half Dome. Esteban had recruited another work friend, Bill Pippi, and his work supervisor, Bob Frith, to join. Frith, in turn, had invited his best friend, Bruce Weiner. Both were East Coast transplants and have recently arrived in California. Bill Pippi invited 16-year-old twin brothers, Bruce and Brian Jordan. Rounding out the group was co-worker Carl Buckner, who in turn invited his best friend Steve Elner. The Rice-Esteban group awoke to a crystal-clear summer sky, ready for a full day of hiking to conquer the famed granite monolith. The caravan entered Yosemite Valley. Being Bruce Weiner's first time, he was awestruck by Yosemite Valley. The monstrous granite cliffs towered high over the valley like looming giants. Entering Yosemite Valley is breathtaking as you gaze up at the mile sheer from the valley floor. Then there it was, Half Dome and its distinct features. One side is a sheer face, while the other 3 sides are smooth and round, making it appear like a dome cut in half. It's the star of the valley, towering nearly 5,000 feet from the valley floor. Weiner had difficulty visualizing himself atop the overpowering mountain and wondered silently if he could really accomplish such a feat. They had a buffet breakfast at the cafeteria at Camp Curry, then loaded their backpacks with gear, clothing, and food. It was a 2-mile march to the trailhead at Happy Isles. The sky was blue when the group headed out except for a single cumulus cloud floating above. By the time they reached Vernal Fall, a few cumuli of clouds had formed in the sky to the east. As the hike went on, Buckner and Elner fell behind and were a good 30 minutes behind the group. Rice, Esteban, Pippi, and the Jordan twins were ahead. Frith and Weiner arrived shortly after. Around 12:30 p.m. to cool off after a rigorous first half of the hike, they dove into the chill water upriver from Nevada Fall. They hooted, shouted, and yelled obscenities while tussling like schoolboys to push each other off. All the while, several cumulus clouds in the eastern skies now had combined and were massing over, and rumblings could be heard in the distance around Cloud's Rest. The threatening weather prompted Tom Rice and his party to pack up. Rice and Esteban assured the others once they were on the summit, they would be safe and dry in the cave if a thunderstorm hit. Pippi and Bruce Jordan were setting a furious pace, hoping to outrace the coming storm. Close behind, Tom Rice and Adrian Esteban made a quick stop at their secret spring. Brian Jordan soon joined them. Back at Nevada Falls, Weiner and Frith were falling behind. Carrying a 45-pound backpack, they'd been behind the other 5 for most of the trip. As exhausted as they were, they plodded ahead anyways, but as they went on, Weiner's muscles began to cramp. They gulped the last of their water. Weiner wanted to take a longer rest, but Frith urged him to push on and catch up with the others. Bill Pippi and Bruce Jordan were shooting to reach the top first. Both were competitive and in good shape. So despite the intimidating weather, the two raced ahead. Unfortunately for Pippi, he had an undeniable sensation to relieve himself of feces, so they headed back to find a place for Pippi. Esteban, Rice, and Brian Jordan were not far behind. As they were ascending, 2 hikers coming down warned them not to go up as the storm was coming. Rather, the warning enticed them to pick up the pace and reach the summit. Buckner and Elner were still very far behind, but continued plodding along, even after the threat of the lightning storm. Well ahead of their companions, Esteban and Rice reached the bottom of the cables at 5:40 p.m. as the dark clouds blanketed the sky. Lightning continued playing over the ridges and spires, and the thunder rumbled like battleship guns nearby. At the base of the cables, there's a sign warning hikers of ascending the mountain during a lightning storm. Half Dome is notorious for lightning strikes. Its smooth granite surface makes for an excellent conductor of electricity. They now had to weigh their next move. The threat of lightning would spur them on. At the top, they'd reach shelter in the form of a cave where they could hide from the storm. While a lightning bolt might possibly strike the granite slop near them, or even hit the cables they would be clinging to, a strike higher up was far more likely. What they didn't factor in was a strike could streak anywhere on wet surfaces. Any place on the mountain would be dangerous if Half Dome were coated with water. As Esteban looked up and analyzed the sky, he felt a drizzle on his face. Torrential rain wasn't far off. They figured this storm was no different from past hazards they have encountered over the years. The two exchanged a glance and knew the decision had been made. "Screw it, this is our mountain, let's just do it," Rice said. Esteban agreed. Despite the looming storm and the warning, they forged on and ascended the cables 600 feet away from the summit, shrouded in mist. Rice moved rapidly toward the cables, with Esteban immediately behind him. As if cued by their movements, a mosaic of jagged lightning streaked the sky, followed by rolling claps. A sense of foreboding overtook Esteban, which prompted him to say, "Whatever happens, I want you to know I love you." Meanwhile, Jordan split from the other group, content to hike at his own pace. Eager to impress the older men, he followed in Rice and Esteban's footsteps without a second thought. Further back were Frith and Weiner. The warning sign at the base of the subdome stared at them as they approached the cables. A concerned Weiner wondered aloud if they should stop and wait out the storm. Frith assured him that refuge was in a cave that awaited them at the summit. He doubted he could make it up, but he figured his muscle would tighten further if he delayed further. As a newcomer, he didn't want to hold anyone back. They caught a glimpse of Rice and Esteban nearing the summit just as clouds unleashed pouring rain. Frith and Weiner put on their ponchos and began ascending the cables to the summit. As Rice and Esteban reached the summit around 6 p.m., they were still aware of their vulnerability. Lightning would strike the dome, it was only a matter of when. They dashed across the summit toward the cave. "We made it!" they yelled jubilantly and high-fived each other. Minutes later, they saw Brian Jordan standing at the summit. Esteban waved him urgently towards the cave. As Brian hustled over, Frith and Weiner appeared at the summit and waved them in as well. "Bring on the lightning show!" they yelled as they settled down in the cave. All were proud of what they had accomplished and were beaming with joy. At this time, the rain turned colder. Hailstones began clattering on the rocks. The five huddled inside the cave, looking to generate some heat. Meanwhile, Bill Pippy and Bruce Jordan had wisely stayed below Subdome after Bruce said he was afraid of the lightning storm. Pippy, now dehydrated and severely weakened from diarrhea, they decided to head to base camp, where they pitched their tent and hunkered down at around 6:15 p.m. Back at the cave, the eerie lightning tracers glowed inside, casting ghostly hues. In an instant, the cave exploded with a cataclysmic roar as lightning ripped across its surfaces. Esteban was slammed against the wall. He screamed but didn't hear his voice. Everything grew dark. He was numb and couldn't move. Electricity had entered his body. Because he had limited contact with the granite, had confined the charge to the left side of his body, and was lucky he didn't get the full effect of the strike. Weiner was also lucky, bending to adjust his laces. He was only touching the wall with his rear and thighs, but he had no feeling from the waist down and was moaning in pain. But he was the most coherent of the group. Weiner turned to look at Brian Jordan, whose eyes were vacant. In shock, he says, "We've got to get out of here." Turning to scan the cave, he saw Rice slouch sideways against the granite wall in a fetal position with his body jerking and twitching. His bare legs were badly charred, and his blonde hair was blackened. As Esteban came to, he looked over at Brian Jordan, slumped forward, smelling of burning flesh. He appeared lifeless. With sickening clarity, Esteban now saw that he and Rice put everyone at risk. Pulling himself with his paralyzed legs behind, he was horrified at what he saw. Firth was vomiting in froth, gurgling from his mouth, eyes rolled back and showing their whites. His forehead bore a gash as if someone had plunged a white-hot dagger into his skull. His body was thrashing and threatened to catapult himself off the ledge. Esteban managed to snag his waistband and pulled him back from the lip, but his body continued to convulse toward the edge as though he was seeking the void beyond. Esteban strained to hold on and yelled for help. Weiner, seeing his friend in peril, managed to grab Frith's sweater. Together, they pulled Frith back. But with both paralyzed from the waist down, they couldn't exert enough leverage. They couldn't control his violent convulsions and were in danger to go over the ledge as well. Weiner desperately held on as Esteban let go. Firth, convulsing, slid farther and was yanking Weiner closer to the edge as well. Weiner had no choice but to let go. In horror, he and Esteban watched as Firth disappeared over the precipice, to the rocks 2,200 feet below. Weiner screamed and began to sob. Devastated by the tragedy, Esteban looks over at Rice, whose left leg was twisted beneath a dislodged rock. He was making unintelligible noises and was gagging on regurgitated broccoli. He cleared his mouth and shook him in a vain attempt to restore consciousness. Severe burns scorched Rice's legs and were still smoking as atmospheric crackling sounded outside. Esteban was petrified and screamed to Weiner, "We've to get the hell out of here." Weiner tried to stand but fell back down. Esteban was convinced they were in mortal peril and could only think of escape. With all his upper body strength, he crawled his way to the tunnel entrance and onto the summit. His sights were set on a crevice called the outhouse that was about 150 feet away. Crawling frantically, he reached the depression. Giddy with relief, Esteban blended tears with shrill laughter as he was alive. And for the moment, that was all that mattered. Back at the cave, Weiner was shaken to the core by the disaster that had befallen him and his companions. He could have mustered enough strength to scramble out of the cave, but getting down the cable with an immobilized leg was unthinkable, and he wanted no part of being out there on the bare summit as a human lightning rod. So he prayed another strike wouldn't happen and stayed put. Buzzing and crackling suddenly filled the air. He had no time to budge before another blinding explosion blasted the granite and ripped through the cave. Weiner immediately found himself floating as he was having an out-of-body experience, watching his body convulse and then slowly sink into a relaxed state. He felt an excruciating pain in his chest. He lay motionless, the charred remnant of his shirt stuck to his exposed skin. Searing pain shot through his legs whenever he moved. The hiking boot on his left leg had been completely blown off. Rice gradually regained consciousness as if the jolt had recharged his brain. He screamed in agony from the weight of Weiner's body on his leg. Rice's other leg was bent grotesquely under a rock. Weiner rolled off him. Next to them was Brian Jordan, his face bluish, his body slumped over. Weiner began to yell for help. The clouds began to pass over, and only faint rumblings of thunder persisted from afar. In this part of Yosemite, the storm was over. Esteban, believing the danger had subsided, left the crevice and began crawling back up to the slope toward the cave. Esteban saw someone coming over the ridge at the top of the cables. He waved his arms to attract the hiker's attention. This hiker was Mike Hoog, who was a trained EMT. As Hoog entered the cave, he saw the disaster that engulfed the hiking party. The odor of burned hair and flesh hung in the air. He scurried over the worst off, who was Brian Jordan. He had no pulse and was dead. He then attended to Rice and Weiner. Esteban, who now had full use of his legs, approached the cave to assist. When Rice saw him, he yelled, "Adrian, get your ass in here and get me out. Don't leave me behind to die like you did." Hoog and Esteban carried the two out of the cave onto the open granite and laid them on the ground, both moaning and squirming in pain. Others from the group Hoog was hiking with made it up to the summit and assisted the injured hiker, which included Linda Cozier, an EMT trainer. Confident Linda and the others could handle injured Rice and Weiner, Hogg figured that him being a long-distance runner should be the person to run for help. With the storm past, Pippi and Bruce Jordan were ready to make their ascent and were back at the cables. Carl Buckner and Steve Elner finally arrived at the cables as well. They regrouped and repacked their backpacks and were beginning to start their ascent when they encountered a frenzied Hoog dashing down. "Hikers had been hit by lightning up on top. I'm going for help," he blurted out. "That's it, I'm not going any farther, I'm out of here," Elner said. He headed back down. Pippi initially thought the hiker meant the strike had occurred some time ago and refused to believe the incident involved anyone in his group. "I simply blocked that notion out of my mind," he later stated. On the cables, they encountered another hurried hiker coming down. Two guys got killed and one was a young kid. Those words stunned Buckner, Pippi, and Bruce Jordan, thinking it could have been Bruce's brother who was killed. In silence, the three continued their climb, the full weight of the unfolding tragedy now hanging over them. As Pippi, Buckner, and Jordan arrived at the summit, they saw Rice. Rice shouted, "The kid's dead. Frith fell over the edge." When Buckner heard this, he couldn't handle it, so he retreated down the cables to the base camp to meet Elner. They didn't sleep much as each attempted to digest the horrifying news about their comrades. As Pippi and Bruce Jordan reached others, Pippi was in disbelief. Bruce just stared blankly as if the reality of his deceased brother hadn't hit him yet. It was 8:45 p.m. and darkness was settling over Yosemite Valley. All the activity of caring for the injured hikers was happening just feet from the precipice of the sheer rock face of Half Dome. Linda Cozier was leading the triage on top of the summit, trying desperately to attend to Weiner and Rice's injuries as best as she could. Pippi was inconsolable as he felt guilty for the death of Brian, who was in his care. Around 9:30 p.m., Mike Hoog reached a ranger station and informed them of the situation unfolding on top of Half Dome. The rangers packed up their supplies and headed up to Half Dome on foot. While a helicopter was considered, it was dark and very dangerous for flying at low altitudes. Without sufficient moonlight, it wouldn't be possible. But around 11 p.m., the moonlight broke through, spurring the rangers to dispatch a helicopter from Modesto. As the rangers who were on foot reached the summit of Half Dome, they were briefed about the situation by Linda. The group was informed about the coming helicopter and set out to find a suitable landing zone on the summit. Just around midnight, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotor blades grew louder and louder. The rangers gathered flashlights and used them as an LZ marker, positioning them in a circle. Time was crucial for the rescue, as if the moonlight vanished, the helicopter might be stuck on the summit overnight. As the helicopter reached the summit, it could only take one patient at a time. It was decided that Weiner was the worse off and needed immediate attention, and was the first to be evacuated down to the valley. Around 1:15 a.m., the helicopter returned for Rice, and he also was flown down. And the last person to be evacuated was Esteban, who didn't need a stretcher like the other two. It was determined Rice and Weiner's injuries required specialized care at a major trauma center and were flown to UC Davis Medical Center. Back on the summit of Half Dome, the remaining hikers were spent mentally, physically and psychologically. There was a strong sense of cohesiveness and mutual affection amongst the group, including the other hikers that stepped in to assist. Remaining on the summit from the Esteban Rice party were Bill Pippy and Bruce Jordan, who was battling with despair as the body of Brian lay in the cave just feet away. Linda Cozier, Mike Hoog, and their party remained on the summit as well. Around 6:30 a.m., a Yosemite National Park helicopter lifted off to retrieve the bodies of Bob Rith and Brian Jordan. They flew to the base of Half Dome and located Frith among the rocks, then flew to the summit to retrieve the body of Brian Jordan. Bruce got in the helicopter with the body of his brother. Shortly after, Pippy hiked down to where Carl Buckner and Steve Elner were camping, and the three trudged back down to the valley. When Pippy arrived at the ranger station, Bruce and Brian's parents were there, which made Pippy again inconsolable as he broke down crying. Mr. Jordan's attempts to comfort Bill Pippy helped him considerably. Unaware of the events that led to the tragedy, the Jordans held Yosemite officials responsible for the disaster at Half Dome and wondered how they allowed hikers to scale Half Dome despite the hazardous weather. Linda Crozier and another member of her party, Brian Cage, gave their statements to the Rangers on what occurred. Cage stated, "That's when it really hit me. As much as this was an accident caused by a combination of Mother Nature and poor human judgment, there remained a looming wrongful death lawsuit against Yosemite. I remember the ranger commenting that a big money lawsuit could easily consume the entire budget, the park-a-lots for making Half Dome and other backcountry destinations accessible." Cage told the ranger they were prepared to testify that the accident happened because the 5 men in the cave had been reckless. Esteban himself had stated as much, so the Jordans were advised to not pursue a lawsuit, as it would likely be dismissed. Esteban struggled with the fact his and Rice's action caused the death of 2 people and 1 is seriously injured. He also struggled with the accusation by Rice that he abandoned him. "The dilemma I faced, do all I could to save someone else and let myself possibly die, or save myself and let someone else possibly die," he said. Fleeing the cave for safety of the 5 hikers, he endured the catastrophe with no major injuries. While thankful, the guilt nevertheless overwhelmed him. He sank into a deep depression and nightmares of Frith toppling off the edge. Tom Rice and Bruce Weiner were hospitalized at UC Davis Medical Center, where both were in critical condition. Bruce spent 3 weeks or so at UC Davis and then was shipped home to Boston, where he stayed in the hospital in a burn unit. He had suffered major kidney damage and required a lot of skin grafts. Unfortunately for him, his grafts got infected and needed to be ripped off and replaced, a process Bruce says was worse than actually getting hit. Bruce lost over 70 pounds while he was bedridden. Unfortunately, most of that weight was muscle, which he had to gain all the way back so he could do fun things like walk correctly again. To this day, Bruce still has muscle loss from the experience. There is permanent nerve damage that he'll likely deal with for the rest of his life. He also has some lingering kidney problems. To this day, the lightning strike won't even let him pee normally. When Weiner reflects on what happened more than 30 years later, he is grateful. "The people that took care of us rescued us and got us out of the cave and looked after us for all those hours until the helicopter came. They didn't know us. They just took it upon themselves to be there and never asked for anything. I'm always going to be very grateful." He also said it was reckless and irresponsible for the experienced leaders of the group, Rice and Esteban, to tell outdoor rookies like him and Frith that there was a safe haven on the summit in the event of a lightning storm. In reality, it was the least safe place we could have chosen to be at that moment, short of standing on top of that mountain with a big lightning rod in our hands, which is essentially what we were doing. But he also takes responsibility for his own ignorance and the dangerous situation it led him to, along with the self-imposed pressure and peer pressure to reach the summit. "It was my responsibility to look out for myself and be smart. Ultimately, we made the decision and no one held a gun to our heads." Tom Rice was in the intensive care unit for weeks and had severe burns on his legs. He resented the fact that Esteban hadn't suffered any injuries and lambasted him for leaving. Esteban stormed out. Linda Crozier, the hiker who stepped in as the lead nurse on the summit, visited Rice many times during his hospital stay in Davis. He made a full recovery months later. The very next summer, Esteban, Rice, and Pippi returned to Half Dome Summit. "We had to prove to ourselves we can do this," Rice stated. Adrian Esteban returned many times to Half Dome as it continued to serve as a barometer of his physical and mental well-being. The rock chamber, however, became a sacred place to not be disturbed, and stayed away from the enclosure during his ascents. For Meenakshi Murthy and Vishnu Viswanath, their Yosemite trip would be catastrophic. Meenakshi Murthy and Vishnu Viswanath, both natives of India, embarked on their journey together from modest beginnings to becoming symbols of adventure and the digital nomad lifestyle. Meenakshi Murthy, also known as Meenakshi, hailed from Kerala, a state in southern India known for its lush landscapes and vibrant culture. Vishnu Viswanath was from Kottayam, another town in Kerala, and both pursued their education in engineering, a field that brought them together and laid the groundwork for their future endeavors. Murthy and Viswanath met during their college years at the College of Engineering in Chenganur through mutual academic circles and interests. Their passion for technology was a common thread, but it was their zest for life and exploration that truly bonded them. Murthy completed her education in software engineering while Viswanath honed his skills in technology and software development. They would marry in 2014 and together envisioned a life not confined by geographical boundaries but driven by a mutual desire to explore new horizons. Moving to the United States was a dream for the young couple to be able to live out these desires. Vishnu eventually secured a position as a software engineer at Cisco Systems in San Jose, California. This move was not just a career advancement, but also a stepping stone into a larger world of opportunities and adventures in the United States. The couple's move to the United States marked a significant phase in their lives, opening up new avenues for professional growth and personal exploration. The diverse landscapes of the U.S. provided the perfect backdrop for their travel blog, Holidays and Happily Ever Afters, which they started as a way to document their journeys and share their experiences with a wider audience. This blog not only served as a travel diary, but also as a platform for Murthy to express her thoughts on life, adventure, and the beauty of embracing the unknown. In the United States, Meenakshi became the more visible face of their online persona. Her distinctive pink hair and vibrant personality made her a memorable and inspiring figure to their followers. Through social media, they shared not just travel stories, but also reflections on life's deeper meanings, encouraging others to break free from mundane routines and explore the beauty of the world. Meenakshi Murthy and Vishnu Viswanath's passion for travel was not just about visiting new places, but about immersing themselves in diverse cultures, capturing stunning landscapes, and sharing these experiences with a global audience. Their influence on social media grew as they skillfully combined their adventures with insightful reflections, becoming a source of inspiration for many. The couple excelled in engaging with their audience. They responded to comments, shared travel tips, and often engaged in conversations about the places they visited. This approach helped them build a community of followers who were not just passive viewers, but active participants in their journey. Their social media presence was not about broadcasting their life, but creating an interactive platform where experiences and ideas could be shared. Murthy was particularly vocal about safe travel practices and the ethical responsibilities of traveling in today's digital age. She often discussed the importance of respecting local cultures and environments, emphasizing that while it's wonderful to seek perfect shots for social media, one must not overlook the impact of their actions on the surroundings. Their social media content often went beyond just travel logs. Murthy often discussed the societal pressures to conform and the freedom that comes from choosing one's unique path. This message struck a chord with many of their followers, especially those eager to escape their daily routines and discover the world. Her reflections went deep into the essence of living life fully, not merely existing, encouraging everyone to embrace each moment and live passionately. Meenakshi, known for her vibrant mermaid hair, described herself as an adrenaline junkie. while Vishnu was celebrated for his phantasmagoric photographic skills and remarkable patience. Together, they shared a dynamic enthusiasm and boundless positivity that captivated thousands on Instagram. Their adventures included playful times in the dunes of White Sands National Monument in New Mexico, intimate moments under the cherry blossoms at Brooklyn Botanic Garden in New York, and a memorable cross-country road trip in a red Mustang convertible. Their Instagram profile showcased images of captivating scenes, such as the immaculate white sand beaches of the Maldives and the Florence Cathedral in Italy. The couple also marked their anniversaries in memorable ways. With a hot air balloon ride in 2016 and skydiving the previous year, with the caption, "Hurling myself out of a perfectly functioning airplane was a dream forever for this pink-haired daredevil," Morthy wrote in the caption of the video from the skydiving excursion. Fittingly, she wore a t-shirt bearing the words, "Gimme danger." Their posts vividly portrayed their deep love for each other and their awe at the splendors of America. However, capturing the perfect shot often had Vishnu and Meenakshi in dangerous situations. The allure of social media recognition can sometimes drive individuals to extreme and perilous actions. People, often motivated by a desire to capture awe-inspiring images that garner likes and comments, venture into hazardous environments, be it teetering on cliff edges, navigating treacherous urban rooftops, or confronting wild animals. This reckless pursuit not only endangers their lives, but also sets a dangerous precedent for impressionable followers. Nevertheless, this hasn't stopped millions of people worldwide from putting themselves in harm's way. Viswanath and Morthy seem to understand the risks of photographing at the precipices of canyons, mountains, or high-rise structures. On Instagram, Morthy cautioned her followers in at least 2 posts to be careful when taking such pictures. In November 2017, alongside a photo of her in a Wonder Woman costume at the Grand Canyon, she wrote, "Please be careful. The wind gusts are extremely dangerous, and your adrenaline rage is not worth your life." Morthy added that she and her husband had waited and ensured it was safe before taking the picture. Another photo shared in March of 2018 of Morthy at the Grand Canyon was solely dedicated to discussing the limits of "do it for the gram." A lot of us, including yours, truly is a fan of daredevilry attempts of standing at the edge of cliffs and skyscrapers. But did you know that wind gusts can be fatal? Is our life worth one photo when we squirm at another selfie attempt gone south from a skyscraper? Let's remember to save that in our core memory, Meenakshi wrote. Despite being fully aware of the risks and frequent warnings to their followers, the couple continued to test boundaries in pursuit of the perfect photo, foreshadowing a catastrophic event that would happen in the near future. The couple planned their Yosemite trip with the intent to capture the majestic beauty of the park during the fall, a time when the valley is awash with vibrant colors and softer light. Yosemite is famed for its towering cliffs, ancient giant sequoias, and breathtaking vistas. Among these, Taft Point is particularly notable. It offers a nearly unobstructed view of Yosemite Valley, El Capitan, and Yosemite Falls, making it a popular spot for photographers and nature lovers. In the waning days of October 2018, Meenakshi Morthy and Vishnu Viswanath embarked on a journey that was to be one of their grandest adventures yet, with the goal of capturing the sunset at Taft Point. This famed overlook offers staggering views of the valley below. Yosemite, with its awe-inspiring cliffs and panoramic views, was the perfect backdrop for their next blog post. They enthusiastically shared their plans with their followers, unaware of the tragic turn their adventure would soon take. On October 24, 2018, ever eager to capture the perfect shot, they made their way along the winding paths of Yosemite. The park was alive with the vibrant colors of fall, and the air was crisp with the promise of the coming winter. Each step brought them closer to Taft Point, where they planned to immortalize the sunset that photographers and nature lovers spoke of with revered tones. Finally arriving at their destination, Meenakshi and Vishnu found the perfect spot, one that offered an unobstructed view of the vast Yosemite Valley. As the sun began its descent, casting golden rays across the sky, Meenakshi and Vishnu set up their camera on a tripod near the edge of Taft Point. A safety railing is installed at the very tip of Taft Point, Still, there are open areas where a person could walk right up to the edge of the precipice, offering unobstructed views that were as beautiful as they were dangerous. The couple, experienced in their craft, were no strangers to taking risks for the perfect shot. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. They set up their tripod near the edge, a precarious yet exhilarating spot that promised the most dramatic angle for their photograph. As other visitors began to leave, Meenakshi and Vishnu were not done just yet. They still needed the shot. With the camera timer set, they stepped back to frame themselves against the breathtaking backdrop. Perhaps it was a slip, a wind gust, a misstep, or a small rock that shifted underfoot. What exactly transpired in those fleeting moments remains unclear. The serene setting was abruptly shattered as Meenakshi and Vishnu fell, plunging more than 800 feet or 240 meters below towards the valley. The camera, its timer still ticking, captured the last rays of the sun fading over the horizon, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded. Vishnu Viswanath was 29, and Meenakshi Murthy was 30 at the time of their deaths. It was not until the morning when park visitors to Taft Point found their camera on the tripod, with the lens still pointing out toward the vast expanse, a silent witness to the tragedy. The alarm was raised when the visitors reported the scene at Taft Point and were reported missing, and a search operation was initiated. The obvious first place to look was down below, where authorities found the bodies of the couple about 800 feet down the side of a steep cliff. Park rangers hiked and rappelled down the cliff to recover their bodies with the help of a helicopter from the California Highway Patrol. "We still don't have any clear idea exactly what happened," Jamie Richards, a Yosemite spokeswoman, said several days afterward. "We are still trying to piece it together." In a strange twist of fate, a man who had trekked to the same location with his girlfriend managed to take photos of Murthy just before her fall, noting that she inadvertently photobombed 2 of their selfies. Sean Madison remarked that Murthy was noticeable among the people watching the sunset at Taft Point last week due to her brightly dyed pink hair. He also mentioned that she made him somewhat uneasy because she seemed to be standing dangerously close to the edge. "She was very close to the edge, but it looked like she was enjoying herself. She gave me the willies. There aren't any railings. I was not about to get that close to the edge, but she seemed comfortable. She didn't seem like she was in distress or anything," Madison said. A few months later, the autopsy found they were intoxicated with ethyl alcohol prior to falling, but no drugs were present in their bodies. Due to the condition of the bodies after the extreme fall, investigators were unable to discern a specific level of intoxication accurately. All we can conclude is that they had been drinking and that they had alcohol in their systems. "We don't know how much," Andrea Stewart, assistant Mariposa County coroner, said. The autopsy report concluded that they died of multiple injuries sustained by a fall from a mountain. Many people worldwide have perished while taking selfies, according to a recent study from researchers in India published in the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care. One of the main causes of the selfie-related deaths included falling from heights, the study found. Around the same time as Meenakshi and Vishnu's fall, an Israeli teenager fell to his death while trying to take a selfie at the top of Nevada Falls, which is 600 feet high. The incident prompted discussions about the safety measures at popular tourist destinations, particularly those like Yosemite, which are known for their natural beauty but also inherent dangers. National parks and tourist spots face the challenge of preserving the natural environment while ensuring the safety of visitors. Yosemite Park officials did not and have no plans to install any more railings at the overlook, stating, "We want all visitors who come to Yosemite National Park to come here, have an adventure, experience the wonder and magic, and go home in the same condition that they arrived here. Anytime that does not happen, it is a tragic day." The loss of Murthy and Viswanath is a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in pursuing the perfect photograph, especially in nature's unpredictable environments. Their story serves as a critical caution to park visitors and anyone venturing out into the wilderness to respect the power and danger of natural landscapes. The couple's passion for travel and adventure leaves a lasting legacy. Still, Their untimely demise is a tragic testament to the risks that can accompany the quest for capturing the world's beauty. One thing is for certain, Vishnu and Meenakshi were soulmates and truly in love, and it was palpable in their photos. Their story is a testament to how shared passions and dreams can transform ordinary lives into extraordinary narratives. Their lives, though tragically cut short, continue to inspire those who dare to dream and explore the beauty and splendor the world has to offer. For Michael Kalantarian, his Mount Clark climb would be an unmitigated disaster. On October 14, 1986, the 30-year-old Kalantarian took 2 days off from his job at the Curry Company in Yosemite Valley to tackle the mountain alone. Rising 11,522 feet or 3,511 meters, Mount Clark cuts a stark figure among the Sierra peaks, its white granite catching the eye like a beacon. The mountain promised solitude, challenge, and a view of Yosemite's wild backcountry. Kalantarian, eager to claim his first summit, couldn't resist the call. Margaret Colvin, a colleague, dropped him at the Mono Meadows Trail, and he set off with quiet resolve. He camped overnight, pressing onward the next morning toward the summit. By midday, he had climbed far but was falling behind schedule. Mount Clark's steep, knife-edged arêtes loomed above him, demanding respect and care. He had no rope, no partner, and little margin for error. Still, he pushed forward, unwilling to turn back. Mount Clark stands tall at the northern edge of the Clark Range, its granite face visible from nearly every peak in Yosemite. It is a mountaineer's mountain, one of 33 peaks in the Sierra Nevada known for its beauty and challenge. The Northwest Arête, a thrilling Class 4 climb, tests even seasoned climbers with its steep, exposed ridges. Here, every move matters. The terrain is unforgiving, the weather unpredictable, and the risks ever-present. For Kalantarian, the mountain's challenge was irresistible. But Mount Clark, like all wilderness, does not forgive recklessness. Michael Kalantarian took a gamble. Climbing alone with no partner to steady his hand or carry his burden, he told no one his route or his plan. He hadn't registered his hike with the Park Service. The backcountry office wouldn't know if he came back late or not at all. Even his co-workers at the Curry Company were in the dark. None of this stopped him. The mountain loomed, and Kalantarian pressed on, racing the October sun as it dipped toward the horizon. To save time, he left his gear behind at a bivouac site, a mile and a half back, along with his survival supplies. He climbed light, relying on hands and feet to scramble up the granite. The mountain's demands were unrelenting, and then he saw it. A steep slab of ice left by an early storm. It glittered in the fading light, a cold barrier. He stopped, the frustration sharp in his chest. To find another route now, with the day slipping away, was no small task. But Kalantarian had no choice. He knew the ice was beyond him. No rope, no crampons, no technical skills for this kind of climb. He'd faced something like this before. An earlier attempt on Mount Clark had ended when illness turned him back, but this time, he wouldn't quit. He scouted another path, steep but free of ice. It looked doable, manageable even. He convinced himself he could make it without a rope, but he couldn't. Kalantarian, determined to summit despite the growing risks, began climbing his newly discovered route, a steep 5.7 rated ascent that he hoped would lead him to the top. The terrain was unforgiving, the granite slick from the recent storm, but Kalantarian pressed on, his hands gripping the cold rock, his feet searching for stable holds. Each move required precision, but he was exhausted, the weight of his decisions beginning to take a toll on both his body and mind. As he reached for what appeared to be a solid handhold, his foot slipped. In an instant, the world tilted, and he lost his grip. Gravity seized him, and Kalantarian plummeted down the rock face, helpless to stop his fall. The wind rushed past him, his body twisting uncontrollably as he tumbled down the mountain. After a terrifying drop of 70 feet, he crashed into the branches of a low, brushy pine tree. The impact was violent, the branches snapping as they broke his fall. He lost consciousness almost immediately, his body limp in the tree's boughs. An hour passed before he awoke, groggy and disoriented, draped awkwardly across the tree. Pain surged through him as he tried to move. He could barely focus. His vision blurred from a head injury sustained in the fall. Slowly, he realized the extent of his injuries. His right ankle was shattered, his wrist was broken, and numerous other injuries covered his body, leaving him bruised and bleeding. Struggling to remain conscious, Calantarian tried to pull himself together. The pain was excruciating, every movement sending shockwaves through his body. He attempted to stand, knowing that he needed to get his bearings and assess his situation, but his broken ankle couldn't support his weight. With sheer determination, he forced himself upright, leaning heavily on the tree for support. The pain was almost unbearable, but he knew he had no choice. He looked around, trying to orient himself. The sky was beginning to darken, the last light of day slipping away. He was alone, injured, and far from help. He knew that he needed to move, to find some way to signal for rescue or at least find shelter for the night, but his injuries made even the smallest step feel impossible. Desperation began to creep in as the reality of his situation sank in. The cold was already seeping into his bones, and without his gear he had no way to stay warm through the freezing night ahead. He tried to think of a plan, but his mind was clouded by pain and the creeping fear of his isolation. Calantarian knew he was in a dire situation. He had to make a decision, either try to crawl his way to safety or conserve his strength and hope that someone would come looking for him. But as the darkness closed in, he realized that he might not survive the night if he didn't find some way to get help. His hat was gone, his sunglasses too, and so was his water bottle. Despite his best efforts, his limited mobility made searching futile, and he never managed to find any of these items. With the late hour pressing down on him, he couldn't afford to waste any more time. He needed to reach his gear before the night's cold overtook him, and he had to get to a lower elevation. So he began crawling downslope. The terrain was brutal. Every inch he covered cost him dearly in pain, excruciating pain. Worse still, it was mid-October at 11,000 feet, and as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature plummeted. The mercury would soon fall to around 15 degrees. Despite his polypropylene underwear, bunting jacket, and cotton shirt, the cold began to numb the pain from his shattered ankle and broken wrist. But soon, the cold started to numb the rest of him as well. Desperate to relieve some pressure from his swollen ankle, he pried off his boot and discarded it. Now, without a hat or a boot, the risk of frostbite and hypothermia increased dramatically. All he had to fight the cold during this long, freezing night in the High Sierra were the clothes on his back. Thinking quickly, he wrapped his shirt around his head, knowing that about 25% of body heat is lost through the head and neck. The night was just as miserable as he had feared. As dawn broke, Calantarian resumed crawling, heading in what he hoped was the direction of his camp. He had a map but no compass, making navigation even more challenging. To make matters worse, his injuries prevented him from descending the same steep Class 4 terrain he had climbed earlier, so he detoured westward along somewhat easier ground. However, this route led him away from his pack and the supplies he desperately needed, which were to the northwest. Despite this, his backpack remained his primary goal, even as he crawled in the wrong direction. Even on this easier route to the west, his progress was agonizingly slow and painful. He knew that if he could soon redirect himself toward the northwest, he would face only a 1.5-mile crawl back to his camp. He had to find a way to make it happen. His survival depended on it. No one knew where he was and no help was coming. During the day, Calantarian tried to stick to ridgelines, which offered better visibility and more direct sunlight. The warmth of the sun was a small comfort, something he had never appreciated so much before. The ridgelines also allowed him to use the sun as a makeshift compass, helping him to orient himself and choose his route. He continued this grueling crawl, alternating between short bursts of movement and necessary rest, all day long. As dusk approached, he searched for water, hoping to find some from melting ice. Reflecting on his agonizing day didn't bring much solace, but he took some small comfort in the thought that he was closer to his camp, closer to the supplies he needed to stave off hypothermia. and closer to the tools he could use to start a fire. A fire would not only provide warmth, but could also serve as a distress signal. Even if no one saw it, it might be enough to keep him alive through the night. Kalantarian's second night crawling through the wilderness was a harrowing ordeal, filled with relentless cold. The following day was no better, and the same misery repeated itself night after night, day after day. His nights were unimaginably miserable. His feet and fingers seemed to freeze solid each time the sun set. It felt like he was trapped in an endless, nightmarish hell of cold, reserved for condemned solo hikers. Yet, despite the agony, Kalantarian continued to crawl downhill, his body weakened by hunger and the freezing temperatures. Though he never reached his camp, he clung to the belief that he knew where he was headed. Shivering uncontrollably, he stared up at the stars each night, using their movement to orient himself and reassure himself that he had been crawling in the right direction all day. What Kalantarian didn't realize, despite using his map, ridgelines, the sun, and the stars for guidance, was that he was not heading back toward his camp, nor was he on the correct course to return to the original route he had taken to reach his current position. His disorientation was further compounded by the fact that he could see lights in the distance at night, coming from the Clark Range viewpoint on Glacier Point Road. These lights were part of a large-scale search effort, spanning a 50-mile radius, meant to help him orient himself. Tragically, Kalantarian mistook these lights for ordinary vehicle headlights on Glacier Point Road. In reality, he was hopelessly lost and had been for days without even realizing it. Meanwhile, back in Yosemite Valley, when Michael missed 2 consecutive days of work, his boss notified the park authorities about his absence. Initially, there was no clear idea of where to start the search. However, by conducting phone interviews with several backcountry hikers from the past few days, and speaking with his friend Margaret Colvin, the search and rescue coordinator was able to narrow down the search area to the western drainages of Mount Clark. The search and rescue operation, led by John Dill, mobilized 150 searchers, 6 helicopters, and 6 dog teams. These volunteers came from at least 18 different agencies, with only one being the Park Service itself. Margaret Colvin guided rescuers to the exact spot where she had dropped Kalantarian off days earlier. His boot tracks were still visible in the soil. In response, Dill dispatched climbers to the summit of Mount Clark as well as nearby peaks, hoping that Kalantarian might have been either extremely ambitious or severely lost. Unfortunately, none of these efforts yielded any results. The search team utilized nearly every tactic in the SAR playbook. One nagging question persisted. Had Colvin remembered everything Kalantarian had told her about his plans? As a last resort, John Dill asked if she would undergo hypnosis by a trained specialist, hoping she might recall some critical detail about Kalantarian's route. Colvin agreed to the session, and while it successfully brought back more memories about his pack and gear, it failed to reveal any new information about his specific plans. Helicopters crisscrossed the area, transporting searchers from one location to another. One of them broke down, while another flew low and slow directly over Kalantarian's position. Desperate, he painfully waved his shirt at the passing helicopter, convinced that they must have seen him, but they hadn't. Coordinator John Dill worked tirelessly to keep the search effort at full intensity, but no one found any sign of Michael. It was as if he had vanished without a trace. Finally, on October 20th, 7 days after Margaret Colvin had dropped off Kalantarian, searchers discovered boot prints matching his along the ascent route up Mount Clark. Following the trail, they soon came across a cap with a Yosemite logo at the base of the steepest section. A recent photograph of Kalantarian, taken as evidence, showed him wearing that same hat. The team sent the hat and hair samples from Kalantarian's tent in the valley to a forensics lab in Fresno for confirmation. Although this process wouldn't provide immediate answers, it was essential to verify that the items belonged to him. By noon the next day, a searcher spotted a discarded leather boot on a lower forested slope. The boot's sole pattern and size matched the tracks left by the missing man. The searchers were puzzled. How had he lost his boot? About 15 minutes later, a nearby dog team found Kalantarian's pack a mile and a half north of the butte. The backpack was positioned on the northwest ridge leading to the summit, a logical place to leave gear during a summit attempt. However, the location of the butte suggested that Kalantarian had been somewhat off course if he was trying to return to his pack. An hour after discovering the butte, one of the searchers noticed faint drag marks cutting through the underbrush and leading down through the woods. By this time, nearly a week had passed since Kalantarian had plummeted 70 feet into that tree, and the urgency of the situation weighed heavily on the search teams. They knew that every minute counted. The searchers, well trained and relentless in their pursuit, were able to carefully track these drag marks, recognizing their significance. The team that found them immediately radioed their location and the direction they were heading to the searchers positioned downhill. This crucial communication set off a coordinated effort, with teams leapfrogging ahead, scanning for any fresher signs that might lead them to Kalantarian. The dense forest and rugged terrain made the search challenging. The drag marks were faint, nearly invisible in some places, and the searchers had to rely on their experience and instincts to stay on the trail. They knew that Kalantarian, injured and disoriented, would have moved slowly, but the possibility of finding him alive kept their determination high. The strategy proved effective. Within just 26 minutes of spotting the initial drag marks, searchers further down the slope made the long-awaited discovery. Kalantarian was found in a drainage about a mile and a half west of Mount Clark. Incredibly, after crawling through the wilderness for 5.5 days, Kalantarian was still alive. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. Despite his injuries and the harsh conditions, he had managed to cover enough ground to have reached his pack, if only he had been on the correct course. When the searchers informed him of his actual location relative to his gear, he was stunned. He had been so far off course that he couldn't believe how close he had come, yet how tragically far he had been from his supplies. The successful search showed the skill and perseverance of the search and rescue teams, especially considering the uncertainty surrounding Kalantarian's disappearance and the delay before the alarm was raised. However, the outcome was bittersweet. Despite the incredible effort to find him alive, the prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures had taken a severe toll on Kalantarian's body. The hypothermia, combined with the repeated freezing and thawing of his extremities, had led to gangrene. Tragically, both of his feet had to be amputated, and he also lost several fingers to frostbite. Kalantarian's survival was a story of both triumph and tragedy. He had defied the odds by staying alive in the face of overwhelming adversity, but the cost of his ordeal was a lifelong reminder of the dangers he had faced alone in the wilderness. For one group of hikers, their Half Dome hike would be horrendous. On September 21st, 2023, Jordan Dean, Josh Van Dyke, Jordan Swendener, a couple of other friends, set off for a typical hike on the trail to summit Half Dome, one of the most popular hikes in America. The day started off clear. The group checked the weather before they set out for a hike, and Jordan Dean remembers seeing a low probability of rain Thursday morning as they set out to summit Half Dome. By the time their group arrived at the Subdome, a destination before the final push to Half Dome, it was slightly foggy. At the base of the cables, there's an infamous warning sign to hikers, warning of lightning strikes. To reach the top of Half Dome, hikers must climb the side of Half Dome, about 400 feet or 120 meters, maintaining balance using metal cables. Nevertheless, they climbed, holding onto the cables. While it was sunny when they began the ascent, little did they know an incoming storm awaited them at the top, and a terrifying ordeal was in their near future. The group had reached Half Dome summit by approximately 12:30 p.m. As the summit became enveloped in fog and the weather took a turn, individuals, including 2 friends in the hiking party, began descending the cables. In a matter of 15 minutes, the once overcast sky transformed into a mix of rain and sleet. Using a 2-way radio, the 2 friends who were descending relayed to Dean that the cables were congested due to the increasing number of people trying to escape the approaching storm, causing slow progress. Consequently, Dean, along with Jordan Swendener, Josh Van Dyke, and their companion Glenn, made the decision to remain at the summit and wait out the inclement weather. The two descending the cables suddenly heard a cry for help. A woman had fallen down the northern face of the mountain, but she was fortunate to strike a rock ledge, preventing a further descent down Half Dome. Emergency services were promptly contacted, and a helicopter crew arrived to rescue her. Rain began to cascade down the mountainside as people continued their descent. Soon, hail joined the weather's fury. During this challenging descent, one of Dean's friends momentarily lost their footing but regained his grip by clutching one of the supporting poles along the cables. Both friends eventually made it safely to the base, although the one who had slipped suffered a severe knee injury. Amidst the descending rain, the atmosphere resonated with the ominous echoes of thunder, signaling the rapid approach of a lightning storm. With no refuge in sight, Dean and his companions, still stuck on the summit, sought shelter from the downpour within a rocky cave on top of Half Dome. A stranger, also looking to find shelter from the incoming storm, joined their group, bringing their number to 5 nestled in the cave. Unbeknownst to them, this seemingly safe decision would prove to be a grave mistake, for this cave held a dark and deadly history. It was the site of one of the most tragic disasters in Yosemite's history. In 1985, a party of determined hikers disregarded the storm advisories and embarked on their ascent of Half Dome. Placing their trust in the cave as a sanctuary, the group sought shelter when lightning suddenly struck. Tragically, the lightning left 2 hikers severely wounded and claimed the lives of 2 others. One hiker succumbed to a harrowing seizure, causing a perilous fall from the precipice of Half Dome, while another perished due to the overwhelming surge of electricity coursing through his body. The remaining 2 hikers, bearing the scars of their harrowing experience, continue to grapple with lasting injuries to this day. As one of the injured hikers put it, in reality, it was the least safe place we could have chosen to be at that moment, short of standing on top of that mountain with a big lightning rod in our hands, which is essentially what we were doing. The group, now sheltering in that very same cave, unaware that this spot was the worst place one could choose on Half Dome. The group assembled within the cave, initially experiencing a fleeting sense of security, believing they were shielded from the encroaching storm. However, this illusion of safety was abruptly shattered when a lightning bolt struck the summit of Half Dome, electrifying the cave where they had sought refuge. The lightning went from one of the rocks to Dean's knee. "It felt like maybe a house voltage or like somebody punched me in the knee," Dean said. Glenn was also struck. "The lightning went from one of the rocks to the back of his head. It was like thunder and lightning instantly splitting your ears," Dean said. In the process of regaining their composure, visibly rattled by the initial lightning strike, they were struck once more. "After the first one, everyone is fine. We don't think another one is going to strike again, and just a few moments later you see it just come straight through the rock," Jordan Swendener recalled. The sheer force of the second strike triggered a catastrophe within the cave as the electricity surged through the bodies of everyone inside. After the second strike, the stranger who was in the cave with them was lifeless, hunched over. Then his body went limp and he fell to the side. We were yelling for him to wake up and trying to shake him, and then checked for a pulse. Glenn began to beat the chest of the unconscious man, trying to get his heart started. Luckily, the man was alive but was unconscious for a little while. Van Dyke was struck at the same time as the stranger and was left dazed. Swendener desperately tried to wake Josh from his daze by yelling his name. "Are we in Denver?" is the first thing Josh said after regaining consciousness. "We didn't remember where we were or how we got there," Van Dyke said of himself and the stranger. About 10 minutes passed before Van Dyke began regaining his memory. "He was like a zombie. He was just a shell of a person," Dean said. Van Dyke's hair was scorched from where the lightning entered, and he later discovered it burned a hole in his sock, leaving a mark on the bottom of his foot, presumably where the lightning exited. The man who lost consciousness regained his sense of what happened within about 20 minutes. "It was scary not knowing if lightning was going to strike again or how bad. There was nowhere to go and nothing we could do about it. That was terrifying," Dean said. After spending approximately half an hour within the cave, the rain finally relented, prompting the group to emerge and unite with fellow hikers stranded atop the summit during the storm. Although a gentle drizzle persisted and the rocks remained slick from the recent downpour, all of them began their descent down the slippery, smooth granite of Half Dome. While the group had felt assured during their ascent of Half Dome, they now understood the need for utmost caution with every step as they made their way down. It's shocking to me how much grip I felt like I had going up versus when it was wet on the way down, Dean said. Van Dyke lost his footing a few times, but was able to catch his feet on the poles to avoid falling. The group came across a group of women who had stopped on the cables mid-descent during the storm. They were so scared and hadn't been moving, Dean said. The women encountered difficulties, particularly due to the lack of traction on their footwear. Dean advised them to remain there and await a rescue. However, one of the young women expressed a belief that her shoes offered a better grip, and she was going to make an attempt to descend. We were just slowly going down and we heard a scream and looked as she kind of lost her grip and hit this pole and bounced out to the side and slid, Josh said. The woman lost her footing and slid approximately 20 to 30 feet, descending down the southern side of the cables. Panic engulfed those on the cables as they cried out in desperation while witnessing her fall until she struck a rock ledge, a stroke of luck that prevented her from plummeting further down Half Dome. She was sliding fast and she hit it really hard and her body didn't move for a minute, Dean said. A rescue worker who had been there to save the other woman who fell attended to the second woman. By the time the group reached the bottom of the cables, they could see the woman was sitting up with a brace. Seeing the second girl fall right in front of us, we all saw her slide down. It really goes to show how serious the situation was, how big and dangerous these mountains can be if you're not prepared, Dean said. Following the traumatic experience, Jordan Dean uploaded a TikTok video recounting the calamitous events of that fateful day. The video quickly gained widespread attention as it went viral. Dean and Swendener granted an interview to NBC Bay Area, where they vividly recounted the events of that day. Their emotions clearly still deeply connected with the memories of that harrowing experience. When asked if they still see the ordeal replaying in their heads, Jordan Swendener stated, "I still have nightmares every night about it. Every time I close my eyes, it's like you're back in that cave again or trying to get off those cables." The beauty of Yosemite makes you forget that this is not a place made for men. It will let you stand at the edge, let you breathe it in, let you believe you are part of it. And then, when you are not careful, when you are just a little too confident, a little too tired, a little too slow, it will remind you lean too far over the edge because the valley is spectacular. And then the stone shifts beneath you, and you are gone. A blink, a slip, a last mistake. The rock in Yosemite is clean, smooth, and perfect. It rises straight into the sky, sheer and impossible, yet people climb it. They come because the stone calls to them, because standing on the ground is not enough, because there is something in a man that wants to go higher, even when they know the fall is waiting. This place is beautiful, but it does not want you. It lets you come, lets you touch the stone, lets you think for a moment that you belong here. But the second you forget yourself, the second you get too tired, too cocky, too slow, Yosemite will have you in the middle of an outdoor disaster. If you've made it this far, please consider clicking those subscribe and like buttons. Want more outdoor disasters content? Check out these videos I believe you'll enjoy. Thank you for watching.